Hello, this is Graham. In this video, we're going to look at sex and relationships and our responses to them. Incongruence around sex is so widespread that this is very likely to provoke some responses in you. Take these to your journal or to your personal therapy. Sex is generally associated with words like intimacy and relationship. Therapy involving any one of these three is going to involve all three. Unfortunately, when we use those abstract words instead of sex, it's easy for people, including us, to avoid talking about the variety of physical sexual acts which are symptomatic of intimacy and relationship. So we need to recognise our own responses to these words and to matters relating to sex. We need to understand these responses and endeavour to become congruent. In other words, our ideal and our real self become closely aligned around the topic of sex. This often means taking our responses to our therapy and exploring them. Sex serves a number of purposes. Apart from making babies and so ensuring the continuity of our genes, it's known to provoke oxytocin production, which prompts long-term bonding of a couple. It also reduces stress, and provided that the sex is penetrative and twice a week, it even reduces the chances of a heart attack. Sex therapists use different terms to differentiate between types of sex. They speak of hookup sex, which simply uses someone else's body to derive pleasure for yourself, marital sex, which can help the relationship or hinder it, and making love, which is about exercising the spiritual connection between the two people. There are lots of facts stated about sex, stereotypes about the male sexual response and the female one. Almost all of these so-called rules have virtually no evidence to support them, or wildly differing results from different studies. The evidence suggests that we are so variable as human beings that the one thing we can say is that there are no rules with regard to sex. The popular model of heterosexual monogamous couples in a long-term relationship, usually confirmed legally, is simply not as consistent as many people would expect. Aside from the obvious homosexual, bisexual and transsexual alternatives, polyamory is widely accepted. The duration of relationships is extremely variable. Rates of infidelity are higher than many people assume, and many couples never get married. Studies show that within developed countries, including the UK, 1 in 50 fathers is unknowingly raising a child who is the biological child of another man. There are some norms, but the extent of variation around them is so wide that they can't be used as assumptions. As a simple example, a very recent survey of Indian married couples aged between 25 and 50 showed that 48% believe that it is possible to be in love with two people at the same time. 46% think that you can have an extramarital affair while still loving your established partner. About 55% of married Indians have had sex outside their marriage at least once, and of those, 56% are women. If they found out about the affair, 7% would forgive the partner without a second thought, and 40% would do so if the circumstances were extenuating. Similarly, 69% expect to be forgiven by their partner. Among Americans, married women under 30 are more likely to have sex outside marriage than men. It then reverses, and men are more likely than women to do so. However, the most likely age group to do so are 60 to 69-year-old women and 70 to 79-year-old men. At the end of the day, we have to remember that something is not an issue unless the quality of life of one of the partners is impaired. That is when they might seek counselling. There are lots of reasons why relationships fail. Amongst those would be trust, different expectations and priorities, a divergence of professional and social life, which leads to people becoming physically, intellectually, and socially distanced, compatibility issues, particularly around intimacy, personality, and attachment, communication issues, narcissism, where one partner has an inflated sense of their own importance, repeated mistreatment, particularly verbal, emotional, physical, and/or sexual abuse, abuse of substances and addictions, drugs, alcohol, and gambling, growing apart, being bored, having a sense of staleness or being in a rut, and finally, money issues. Communication, or rather the lack of it, is a symptom of most of these, as are changes in the nature and frequency of sex. So what can we as therapists do to help? If an individual is struggling with declining communication in their relationship, they may turn to a general counsellor. If an individual feels that their quality of life is suffering as a result of the relationship, they might turn to a general counsellor. If an individual has identified possible personal factors that are impacting on their satisfaction in the relationship, then they too may turn to a general counsellor. As a rule, generally, if we have a couple whose partnership is suffering from communication and they want to work on it together, then we would refer them to a couples counsellor or couples therapist. Similarly, if we have two partners or more who want to work together on the physical and emotional relationship, we would probably think of referring them to a sex or relationship therapist. But there's a lot we can do in those first three categories, especially where an individual feels that there is something about themselves that is impacting on their satisfaction in the relationship.